In Revelation chapter 14 verses 8 to 11 is a rather frightening warning against receiving the mark of the beast. Listen while I read it to you. And another angel followed, saying, Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she has made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. Then a third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, If anyone worships the beast and his image, and receives his mark on his forehead or on his hand, he himself shall also drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out full strength into the cup of his indignation. And he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment ascends for ever and ever, and they have no rest day or night who worship the beast and his image, and whoever receives the mark of his name. Well, that's a very solemn warning, and I think that we should take care to find out what it's all about. I think this program might help you.
The island of Patmos is about 300 kilometres southeast of Athens, off the Turkish coast. And you certainly get a magnificent view looking down on the island of Patmos as your helicopter wings its way through the air and hovers over the island. It's only a small island. It's only 12 kilometres in length, and at its narrowest, it's only about 100 metres from one side of the island to the other. And down there, near the narrow part, is a little beach, and that is probably where John saw himself in the vision. The island of Patmos itself is a very interesting place. A rocky island, yes, but very fertile. And there are shepherds minding their sheep, there are crops growing, and some beautiful wildflowers, and you'll even see some Australian wattle there. There is a cave, which is supposed to be the place where John had his vision. Well, I don't think there's any evidence for that, but anyway, there's a church built over the cave. And right up at the top of the mountain of the island, there is a very impressive-looking monastery. And this monastery has some very important and ancient documents, some manuscripts that were written more than 1,000 years ago. And so all this is on the island of Patmos. But now let's go down to the beach where John had his vision, because he says here in Revelation chapter 13 and in verse 1, Then I stood on the sand of the sea and saw a beast rising up out of the sea. So he was on the sand of the sea. Presumably, in vision, he saw himself on the beach of Patmos. Revelation chapter 13 and in verse 1, John says, Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name. Now the beast which I saw was like a leopard. His feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. Now the beast that is described here has the same identification marks as the little horn in Daniel chapter 7, which we identified as the Roman Catholic Church. For instance, it says here in verse 7, It was granted him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. It was to be a persecuting power. I won't say anything more about that now, but in our next program I have some rather chilling facts to present before you about what history says concerning the persecutions mentioned here. So the papacy undoubtedly was a persecuting power. It says in verse 6, Then he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. Now that's rather significant. Not only blasphemy against God, which we noticed in a previous program, but also those that dwell in heaven. I have here a little pamphlet that I purchased from a Roman Catholic bookshop, and it is called A Priest. In fact, it's all about a priest. And talking about the priest, the author of this little tract, Robert Nash, S.J., that means Society of Jesuits, says, a Roman Catholic gives unhesitating approval of the sentiment of St. Francis of Assisi, who writes that if he met a priest and an angel, he would salute first the priest and only after the priest the angel. In other words, that's putting the priest ahead of the angel, isn't it? And he is inclined to believe, or at least countenance, the anecdote which relates that before a certain priest's ordination, his angel guardian was seen walking before him, but after ordination, the angel followed behind. And so you see, this is exalting the priesthood above the holy angels of God in heaven, and that's what the record says. The prophecy said he would blaspheme those who dwell in heaven. In verse 5 it says, he was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and was given authority to continue for 42 months. Now let's just notice that on the blackboard, 42 months. 30 days to the month, multiply 42 by 30, and you have a period of 1,260 days. We've already noticed that a day in prophecy represents a year, and so here is a period of 1,260 years. Now this is the same period as was mentioned in Daniel chapter 7, a time, times, and half a time. And that began in the year 538 AD and reached forward to the year 1798 AD. And what was to happen in that year? Well, remember it says here in verse 3, I saw one of his heads as it had been mortally wounded. And that, of course, is when Napoleon's armies marched down to Rome and occupied not only Rome but the Vatican, and sent the Pope into captivity in France. General Berthier carried out this operation, and the Pope died in exile 1 year later, in the year 1799. And everyone thought that the papacy, as a political power, had met its doom, come to an end, never to rise again. Seemed to be a mortal, deadly wound. But the Bible knew better. It says here in verse 3 that his deadly wound was healed. He was to recover from this mortal blow, in other words. And of course the papacy did. Just look at the papacy today. Everyone admires the Pope and his present activities. In fact, it says here, and all the world marveled and followed the beast. You know, when the Pope went to America, the crowd sang there. He's got the whole wide world in his hands. Now that's a song that usually applies to Jesus Christ, but they applied it to the Pope of Rome. And today, the Pope of Rome is a very popular figure, a very influential figure, not only in religious affairs, but even in politics. Today, all the world is marveling at the power and authority of the Pope of Rome. We're in Washington, the capital of the United States of America, and behind me on the left-hand side there is the Lincoln Memorial, in which is a statue to a very great man, Abraham Lincoln. And we're here because I believe that this is relevant to a prophecy that we are studying right now. And that is in Revelation chapter 13, where it continues by saying, he who leads into captivity shall go into captivity. Now that is speaking about the occasion when the Pope was taken into captivity in the year 1798. Verse 11 says, at that time, I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb. Now we've spoken about beasts rising up out of water, symbolizing kingdoms rising up from the turbulent nations of the world. But here is a nation that rose up where there was no water, no nations, no peoples. And this, I believe, very fittingly applies to the United States of America, which grew up in isolation in the North American continent. It's interesting to look at the history of this nation. In the year 1620, the Pilgrim Fathers set out on that memorable journey in that brave little ship, the Mayflower, and they reached these shores, a new country where they expected to find freedom and liberty. And so here they settled down. But soon they became discontented with the colonial position that they held, and so in 1775 they launched the War of Independence. The following year, 1776, they issued the Declaration of Independence, and in 1783 England was obliged to recognise the independence of the new nation. In 1793, Washington was chosen as the new capital. We are on Capitol Hill, and it was on September 18, 1793, that George Washington laid the cornerstone of the building that you see, which was to be the administrative centre of the United States of America. The statistics show that the population of Washington at that time consisted of 2,464 free settlers and 623 slaves. But it is the time element that interests me most. It was in the summer of 1800 that Congress moved into this building. Now remember, it was in 1798 that this beast, this power, was to arise. You see, the prophecy was spot on as far as time was concerned. Now in Revelation 13 and in verse 11 it speaks about this lamb-like beast, but it says, he spoke like a dragon. I'm standing in front of the Pentagon, which is the military headquarters of the United States of America, which today is the strongest nation on the face of the earth. But it was not always so. You see, go back to the year, say, 1900, and you find a United States that was desperately anxious to keep out of the affairs of the world. They were isolationist, and they just didn't want to get involved in the wars and the conflicts of Europe and other parts of the world. But it was not to be. And so when the 1914-18 war came along, America tried to keep out, but without success. She was drawn into that conflict. But when that war was over, again, America tried to withdraw into its shell. Then came the 1939 war. Once more, America tried to keep out of it. But then came Pearl Harbor, and it was no use. America realized it must be involved. And today, it is a very powerful nation. And when the President of the United States speaks, the countries of the world have to listen. They may not agree with what he says, but they've got to listen, because today this nation speaks with the voice of a dragon, and its voice is heard. In verse 12 it says, and he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence, and he deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which he was granted to do in the sight of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who was wounded by the sword and lived. Now this doesn't mean that one day there's going to be a silver or a gold or a marble image made. This is figurative language. And the thrust of the prophecy is that the second beast, that is Protestant America, is going to follow in the footsteps of the first beast, that is the Roman Catholic Church, in trampling on the rights of conscience, in forcing people to do something against their will. And so here is a violation of the very principles of liberty and freedom upon which Protestant America was founded. It envisages a reconciliation between Protestant America and Catholic Rome. Now it's rather interesting, behind me is the White House, which is the residence of the President of the United States of America. We have not been invited in there to lunch, and that doesn't surprise me at all. But what does concern me is the fact that the Pope of Rome was invited in there. There has been a Roman Catholic president there, John F. Kennedy. And the Pope of Rome, on his visit to Washington, was invited in to the President of the United States of America. Here is a reconciliation that few dreamed of. 50 years ago, people were throwing stones at each other, Protestants and Roman Catholics, but the situation has vastly changed recently. And so we have a reconciliation, predicted and fulfilled. Now this isn't just opportunism interpretation. In other words, not just because it's happened we say this is what it means, because in 1888, Seventh-day Adventists published the book Great Controversy, in which it was predicted that this would happen. Now in verse 16 it says, and he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark on their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no one may buy or sell except the one who has the mark or the name of the beast. Now here again, this is not a literal mark that is going to be stamped in the forehead. It is something that's going to be received into the mind and acted on. And what is this mark that is referred to? Obviously, it is a mark of Rome's authority. And what is that mark? I have here two Roman Catholic catechisms which I purchased in Roman Catholic bookshops. The first is called The Catechism Simply Explained by Canon Caffarata. There is an interesting statement here on page 88. It says, "A word about Sunday. God said, remember that thou keep holy the Sabbath day." The Sabbath was Saturday, not Sunday. Why then do we keep Sunday holy instead of Saturday? The Church altered the observance of the Sabbath to the observance of Sunday. Protestants who say that they go by the Bible and the Bible only, well, that's me, and I hope it's you too. Protestants who say they go by the Bible must be rather puzzled by the keeping of Sunday when God distinctly said, keep holy the Sabbath day. The word Sunday does not come anywhere in the Bible, so without knowing it, they are obeying the authority of the Catholic Church. Now, do you get the message there? They're saying that Sunday keeping is an evidence of the authority of the Catholic Church. Another statement in this book, The Controversial Catechism by the Reverend Father Stephen Kiernan. It says, question, have you any other way of proving that the Church has power to institute festivals of precept? Had she not such power, she could not have done that in which all modern religionists agree with her. She could not have substituted the observance of Sunday, the first day of the week, for the observance of Saturday, the seventh day, a change for which there is no scriptural authority. How do you get what it's saying? It is saying that Sunday is a mark of Rome's authority. And one day, this mark, Sunday keeping, is going to be enforced. Now, there's one point I want to make very plain. Nobody has the mark of the beast at the present time, even though they keep Sunday. It is only when all these conditions are fulfilled and a law is passed requiring observance and everyone knows what they're doing, then those who observe Sunday in contradiction to the Bible will be receiving the mark of the beast. And you can understand how it could be observed. What with plastic money and computers, it won't be hard to determine who is going to receive the mark of the beast and who will not. Now, who are the people who will not receive the mark of the beast? In Revelation 6:17, it is talking about the second coming of Christ, and it asks a question. It says, for the great day of his wrath has come, and who is able to stand? And then in chapter 7, it gives us the answer. I saw another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God, saying, do not harm the earth, the sea, or the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our God in their foreheads. They're the people that are going to be ready, the people who are sealed with the seal of God in their foreheads. Now, what does it mean to be sealed with the seal of God? Well, in Isaiah chapter 8 and in verse 16, it says, bind up the testimony, seal the law among my disciples. You see, it's got something to do with the Ten Commandments. I want to tell you something about seals. There are two types of seals. There is the stamp seal, such as this Egyptian scarab, and it has an inscription there, and it is pressed down on the clay or the wax or whatever, and leaves an impression. And then there is the cylinder seal. Now that has an inscription on it, and it is rolled along on the soft clay like that, and it leaves an impression. Now, a seal of a royal type has three elements in it. That is the name of the king and his title and the kingdom over which he rules. For instance, in Egypt, it would be, say, Menkapereh, king of the two lands of Upper and Lower Egypt. Or in the case of George Washington, whose monument you see behind me here, it would be George Washington, President of the United States. Now, when you look at the law of God, those three elements are only found in one of the commandments, and that is the fourth commandment, where it says, in 6 days, the Lord made, that is, he's the creator, of heaven and earth. You see, it's got those three elements. And so I consider these to constitute the seal of the living God. In other words, the seventh-day Sabbath is the seal of the living God. And that's what the servants of God will have in their foreheads when Christ returns, those that are ready to meet him. And so it's a good thing to have that seal in your forehead. And in Leviticus chapter 23, and in verse 3, it tells us that the seventh-day Sabbath is a holy convocation. It's a Sabbath of solemn rest. A convocation means a gathering together. So it's a time to meet together with those of like faith. I think you'll find there's probably a Seventh-day Adventist church not far from where you live. And I also think that if you like to attend on the Sabbath morning, you will find that a friendly welcome awaits you.
Thought-provoking, isn't it? For our next program, we'll be returning to Rome and visiting the Vatican, that remarkable state within a state. And David will be discussing the prophecy about the man with the mysterious number 666 and the woman adorned in purple and scarlet.